It's hard not to show any emotion at all, and some Twitter users watching the procession of the Queen's casket noticed some coming through on Kate Middleton's face. Here's what they saw. The royal family's most senior women have been in the spotlight following the loss of their matriarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Princess Anne, Elizabeth's only daughter, has been making history and winning hearts with her public displays of affection for her mother.
When Princess Catherine opened Queen Camilla's private jewelry box, she expected tradition. Instead, she uncovered betrayal. Hidden beneath layers of silk were Princess Diana's most iconic heirlooms, thought lost for nearly 30 years. From sapphire earrings to a gold locket holding William and Harry's photo, the discovery sent shockwaves through Clarence House. Why were these pieces kept secret? And more importantly, what was Camilla planning to do with them? Everything changed. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in April 2025 when Princess Catherine stepped through the gates of Clarence House, fulfilling a routine duty on behalf of King Charles III. She was there to assist in reviewing select artifacts for an upcoming royal charity auction, a task she had performed many times before. Expecting to see ledgers, letters, or perhaps some forgotten paintings, she moved between rooms with her usual grace. But then, something unexpected happened. An aide mistakenly guided her to the private quarters once used by Queen Camilla. Instead of entering the archive chamber, Catherine found herself in a room filled with antique cabinets and drawers that hadn't been touched in years. Among the drawers was one lined in deep red velvet, oddly marked with a single word etched in gold: private. Assuming it might contain letters or old keepsakes, Catherine gently pulled it open. To her shock, she was staring at a small but glistening collection of unmistakable jewelry pieces. At first glance, she thought they might be replicas or costume pieces, but as she leaned in closer, her breath caught in her throat. There, perfectly preserved, were Princess Diana's iconic sapphire drop earrings, a piece Catherine had only ever seen in archival photographs. Every stone, every detail matched. It was like opening a door to the past. Among the velvet was a small gold locket, slightly tarnished but undeniably sentimental. It was one Diana wore frequently in the late 90s, with photos inside of Prince William and Prince Harry from when they were just boys, barely 7 and 13 years old. Tucked behind it was a familiar diamond brooch Diana wore during a state dinner in 1997, just months before her death. These weren't museum items or ceremonial trinkets. These were the personal relics of a woman whose life, legacy, and heartbreak had shaped the very course of royal history. Catherine froze, unable to comprehend how these intimate treasures had ended up here, in Camilla's estate, far from the eyes of the public or Diana's sons. Palace insiders later shared that Catherine stood in silence for nearly 10 minutes, visibly trembling as she ran her fingers along the sapphire earrings. For a brief moment, time stood still. It felt like Diana herself was in the room. That day was meant to be a procedural errand. Instead, it became a defining emotional moment, one that would unravel decades of secrecy and shake the royal household from the inside. What Catherine found that day wasn't just jewelry, it was memory, legacy, and betrayal, all wrapped in velvet. She had uncovered something the royal family had quietly allowed to vanish, the soul of a mother who never got to see her sons grow up. But it wasn't just the shock of discovery that rattled her. It was what came next, realizing how deeply hidden these treasures were and how long they had been concealed from the people they were meant to honor. Princess Diana's belongings, hidden in plain sight. As Catherine examined each item, she quickly realized the significance of what she had uncovered. The sapphire earrings, last seen during Diana's 1996 appearance at the Met Gala, had been reported missing shortly after her death. They had vanished from public view for over 28 years, presumed either lost in transition or taken into private collections without formal documentation. Behind the locket lay an item even more stunning, a gold tiara, lightly wrapped in tissue paper, which Diana had worn during her final state visit to France in 1997. None of these pieces had been listed in any inheritance or museum inventory. They had simply disappeared. Even more disturbing, as Catherine continued her inspection, she noticed that the pieces were arranged carefully, not discarded or forgotten. They had been preserved with precision, clearly cared for. It was as though someone had been curating them in private. According to royal records reviewed later, none of these items had ever been passed down to William, Harry, or their spouses. Despite Diana's will, which outlined the transfer of her personal jewelry to her son's future wives, these particular pieces had been left out. This meant that someone, likely Camilla herself, had intentionally kept them outside of formal royal channels. Among the most heartbreaking discoveries was a charm bracelet Diana had gifted William for his 13th birthday in 1995. It bore the engraved initials W.A. for William Arthur, and Catherine instantly knew it had never been seen by her husband in adulthood. It had been kept hidden, silently tucked away among Diana's treasures, as if waiting for someone to finally find them. There was a growing realization that this was not just a coincidence, it was a silent act of erasure, buried beneath royal protocol and personal history. By the end of the hour, Catherine had catalogued 6 separate pieces that had once belonged to Diana, all of which had been thought lost for over 2 decades. She took photographs, noted their condition, and immediately contacted her personal security to prepare for transport. As she locked the drawer behind her, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a revelation that would reignite old wounds, expose new divisions, and pull Diana's ghost back into the heart of the House of Windsor. For Catherine, this moment stirred more than curiosity. It awakened grief. The items weren't merely jewelry, they were memories, relics, and symbols of a woman whose life and death still shaped the monarchy. But as the initial shock faded, the emotional weight began to press down harder. Catherine wasn't just uncovering family artifacts, she was unearthing secrets. What happened next wasn't a royal confrontation, it was something more human. A private, quiet breakdown that no one in the palace saw coming. Catherine breaks down. After locking the drawer, Catherine moved to a nearby chair and sat down slowly. She clutched the sapphire earrings tightly in both hands, as if holding onto something sacred. According to a royal staffer present, she said nothing at first. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through old photos of Diana wearing the same earrings. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her eyes welled with tears. The staffer noted the time. It was 3:42 p.m., just over an hour after she'd arrived. A soft whisper finally broke the silence. These were hers. Why weren't we told? Catherine wasn't angry. She was heartbroken. To be in the presence of something so personal, so full of meaning, and to have it hidden from the family felt like a deep violation. For over 13 years, she had honored Diana's memory publicly and privately. She had worn her ring, echoed her fashion, even championed her causes. And now, she was holding a part of Diana no one thought still existed. That evening, she returned to Adelaide Cottage and waited until the children were asleep before she showed the items to Prince William. But before she could say anything, she broke down crying in the sitting room. William, stunned, asked what was wrong. She simply handed him the locket. As soon as he saw the photo inside, of him and Harry as boys, he sat down beside her in stunned silence. The two of them sat there for nearly 45 minutes, processing what this meant and what it had uncovered. Catherine would later tell a close confidant that it felt like being in the presence of Diana's ghost. The earrings, the locket, the tiara, each piece a whisper from the past, a reminder of a mother lost too soon. For years, she had wondered why so little of Diana's personal jewelry had reached her. Now she had her answer. And it wasn't just painful, it was infuriating. The tears eventually gave way to silence. But the questions remained. How had these pieces ended up with Camilla? Why had they been hidden for so long? The royal family prided itself on legacy, documentation, and protocol. Yet here were Diana's most intimate belongings, stashed away behind velvet in a private chest. As William and Catherine began piecing things together, a darker truth started to emerge, one of omission, misdirection, and a quiet betrayal they could no longer ignore. The unwritten betrayal, the shock deepened when Princess Catherine realized the full implication of what she had found. These weren't just misplaced trinkets. They were Princess Diana's personal treasures, specifically noted in her 1993 revised will to be passed on to her sons and their future wives. Yet here they were, in Queen Camilla's private collection, decades later. There had never been any official announcement that Camilla received these items, nor had any mention been made in the Royal Collection archives between 2002 and 2022. It was as though they had been intentionally erased. Behind closed palace walls, aides began whispering about the timeline. The Clarence House inventories from 2005, when Charles and Camilla officially moved in, had vague entries like unclassified brooches and heirloom tiaras, pending classification. Nothing that mentioned Diana's name directly, but in a sealed folder marked personal property, not for cataloging, the list matched items now in Camilla's chest. Some suspected it had been kept deliberately vague to avoid scrutiny. Others believed Camilla may have pressured Charles during their 2005 wedding arrangements to quietly hand them over. One of the more troubling discoveries was that several of these pieces had been insured under Camilla's name since 2007, including the sapphire earrings and the gold locket. This suggested Camilla had formally claimed ownership, despite lacking any legal basis under Diana's will. There was no signature from either William or Harry authorizing the transfer. That meant the jewels were not only hidden, they were falsely registered. Catherine knew what this meant. This wasn't just palace error, this was deception. For Catherine, it felt like an invisible theft. These weren't just shiny ornaments, they were relics of a woman who had endured so much heartbreak under the same roof. Camilla had once been the reason for that heartbreak. To now see Diana's precious memories locked away in Camilla's chest, not worn, not displayed, not even acknowledged, was a level of cruelty Catherine hadn't expected. It was a silent betrayal that spoke volumes. Catherine left Clarence House with the chest's photos burned into her mind. That night, she told William everything. What followed wasn't rage. It was something quieter and far more terrifying. A royal fury, deeply personal and rooted in decades of pain, began to stir in Prince William's heart. William's silent fury, after Catherine told him. Prince William, now 42 years old, had weathered many storms in the public eye, but this one hit differently. When Catherine placed the sapphire earrings and gold locket on the table before him at Kensington Palace, he didn't speak. For a long time, he just stared at them. Then he picked up the gold charm, a tiny piece marked with W, the same one Diana gifted him for his 13th birthday in 1995. His face tightened, and the silence was heavier than any words could carry. He didn't ask Catherine to explain. He knew exactly what she'd found. He remembered Diana wearing the charm on her bracelet during summer holidays at Balmoral. He remembered the locket. She would open it and smile whenever she talked about her boys. And now, after being told for years that these pieces were lost or damaged, here they were, untouched, unshared, hidden inside the very woman Diana had once called the third person in her marriage. William's hands shook. It was grief mixing with fury. Without alerting the wider royal household, William contacted the Royal Collection Trust and requested a complete audit of all items once belonging to Diana. The email was sent at 10:46 p.m., just 2 hours after Catherine's discovery. The next morning, William personally visited Buckingham Palace's Records Division, demanding access to archived inventories between 1997-2007. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Multiple items listed in Diana's private collection were quietly reassigned to Camilla, without legal chain of custody. Those who saw William that day described him as chilled to the bone. A royal historian noted it was the first time William had invoked the phrase, "She's taken enough from my mother already." To those familiar with his normally composed demeanor, it was a rare moment of emotional rupture. But instead of going public, William opted for a different path, one that would force Camilla into accountability without shaking the monarchy further. The gloves had quietly come off. William's response sent shockwaves across the palace corridors, but the one person who didn't flinch was Camilla. When confronted, she offered a justification, one that only deepened the pain and made the truth harder to swallow. Camilla's cold defense raises more questions. When summoned to a private meeting at Sandringham House on a rainy Tuesday morning, Queen Camilla appeared unfazed. Dressed in muted gray and pearls, she addressed the issue as though it were a misunderstanding. "I rescued those pieces," she reportedly said, "from being boxed and forgotten in some dusty vault." She claimed King Charles, back in 2001, gave her informal permission to store select heirlooms for historical safekeeping. But there was no written record of that conversation, no signature, no trace. Camilla insisted she had no plans to wear the pieces, she was only preserving them in memory. Yet several staff members recalled a different tone from her over the years. In 2008, one footman remembered overhearing Camilla refer to Diana's sapphire tiara as too beautiful to waste on sentiment. And in 2015, Camilla, allegedly, instructed her stylist to design a brooch inspired by Diana's gold locket, an odd move if she meant only to preserve, not possess. More disturbing was the lack of transparency. Camilla had kept these pieces out of royal inventories for nearly 2 decades, despite knowing Diana's will was public knowledge. The items had not been shared, loaned, or even disclosed to William and Harry. Her reasoning, that they would have been lost to bureaucracy, rang hollow to Catherine, who viewed Camilla's choices as calculated, not careless. The royal family is built on tradition and protocol, and Camilla had clearly bypassed both. Catherine left that meeting feeling colder than ever. The Camilla who once claimed to want peace within the family had hidden the very artifacts of pain, reminders of betrayal, sorrow, and resilience. To William and Catherine, this was no longer about jewels. It was about history, memory, and the story they would pass on to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Camilla's excuses didn't erase the fact. Diana had been silenced once. Her legacy would not be again. But what started as a family revelation was quickly turning into a public reckoning. As legal experts weighed in and media rumors began to swirl, the world realized this wasn't over. Diana's voice was rising again through the people who loved her most. Public whispers begin. Despite the palace's best efforts to keep the matter internal, whispers leaked. One of the housekeeping staff at Sandringham, overhearing the confrontation between William and Camilla, shared details with a former aide who then tipped off a journalist. By the weekend, discreet headlines began appearing. Diana's jewels missing and family feud over royal inheritance? Though the stories were vague, they set the tone for what was to come. The public had long memories when it came to Diana, and now they wanted answers. The Royal Collection Trust attempted to downplay the situation, stating that no formal inventory has been disputed. But behind the scenes, legal experts started reviewing Diana's 1993 will, and the implications were significant. Legally, if personal items were meant to go to William and Harry and ended up in Camilla's possession without documented transfer or bequeathal, that constituted a civil breach of inheritance terms. It was enough to warrant quiet legal review, something Prince William had already initiated. A Queen's Counsel barrister, speaking anonymously, revealed that there was precedent for reclaiming such items, even decades later. If items were wrongly withheld or reassigned outside the terms of a binding will, he explained, there may be grounds for legal restitution or forced return. The implication was huge. Camilla could be forced to give the pieces back. And worse for the monarchy, the case could bring Diana's pain back into the public spotlight with renewed intensity. What shocked many was William's choice to go through legal channels quietly. He didn't release a statement, didn't alert the press, and didn't make a spectacle. It was a sign of both his restraint and his determination. To William, this wasn't about punishing Camilla. It was about protecting his mother's memory and restoring what was stolen in silence. It was a reckoning long overdue, and the world was beginning to watch. But before the legal path could proceed, something unexpected shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. An anonymous source reached out to William. What they revealed would take the entire family decades back and shine light on a truth even more devastating than stolen jewels. A hidden diary and the voice of Diana herself. In early April, a former royal archivist, now retired and living in Sussex, contacted Prince William's private secretary. She claimed to have a handwritten journal Diana had entrusted her with in 1996, shortly before her passing. The diary had never been released to the public and wasn't part of the known materials published after her death. It was locked away, hidden out of fear it would be suppressed. Now, with rumors surfacing again, the archivist felt it was time William knew what was in it. The diary was only 42 pages long, but covered Diana's feelings during the darkest phase of her marriage, including her anguish over Camilla, fears about being erased, and her hopes for her sons. One passage stood out. If they bury me before I've had my say, I pray William and Harry find these words. They'll know what's real. They'll remember I wanted the world to see my truth, not theirs. William read it in silence. It shattered him. She had written about the very items Catherine discovered, the sapphire earrings, the locket, and several other pieces she intended as private gifts to her sons. She had feared Charles would allow Camilla access to them one day. She even noted, chillingly, Camilla will wear my memory like a costume, and no one will stop her, unless my boys do. The rawness of Diana's pain, laid bare in ink and grief, broke whatever patience William had left. He immediately had the diary authenticated and catalogued under the Royal Archives. But more than that, He instructed his legal team to file an internal claim against the estate inventory logs, now backed by Diana's words. It wasn't just an issue of possession now. It was one of intent, memory, and betrayal. Diana's voice had returned, and it would not be silenced again. As the legal wheels began to turn, Queen Camilla's public schedule was mysteriously cleared. No appearances, no speeches, and suddenly, a closed-door meeting was scheduled at Balmoral, a meeting where the monarchy would finally confront its most painful ghost. The Balmoral Confrontation. Balmoral Castle, the Queen's private Scottish residence, had always been a place of quiet strength and royal reflection. But on that grey April morning, its walls felt colder than usual. Camilla arrived first, escorted by 2 senior aides. William and Catherine followed shortly after, joined by a private legal advisor. King Charles, frail and emotionally strained, was already inside. The air was heavy. This wasn't a family reunion. This was a reckoning. William didn't raise his voice. Instead, he laid the authenticated diary, photos of the recovered items, and Diana's will on the table. "This is no longer a misunderstanding," he said. "This is theft of memory." Charles said little, but Camilla, visibly rattled for the first time, tried to defend her actions again, claiming she never intended harm. Her words rang hollow. Catherine sat silent beside William, eyes locked on Camilla, not with rage, but with something colder: disappointment. The king asked everyone to step out, except for Camilla and William. What happened inside that room remains confidential, but what leaked later was telling. Camilla left Balmoral in tears, and Charles remained at the estate for 4 more days, canceling public engagements. Insiders claimed William gave his father an ultimatum: "You can choose silence, or you can choose justice for the woman you hurt." It was not a threat. It was a request, for once, to do the right thing. When Camilla returned to London, a formal letter was issued to the Royal Collection Trust, declaring her intent to return the contested items to Prince William and Prince Harry. But the damage had been done, and Diana's memory, once buried beneath palace whispers, had become impossible to ignore. The confrontation had cracked the royal image, and nothing could fully repair what had been revealed. But there was still one piece missing, one final item William hadn't seen since he was 15. It wasn't jewelry. It was something far more intimate. And when it surfaced unexpectedly, it didn't just bring closure, it brought him to tears. The final letter. Weeks after the Balmoral confrontation, an elderly royal nurse contacted Kensington Palace. She had worked at Kensington Gardens in the 90s and revealed she had been entrusted with a sealed envelope addressed to William, written by Princess Diana in 1997, a month before her fatal crash. She had held on to it for 28 years, honoring a promise that it would only be delivered if William ever publicly challenged Camilla's role in the royal family. Now, that moment had come. The letter was handwritten, sealed with Diana's crest, and opened by William alone in his study. Catherine later said she found him still at his desk hours later, unmoving. The letter wasn't bitter. It wasn't vengeful. It was Diana in her truest voice, maternal, loving, hopeful. She wrote, "If I'm gone, and you find yourself facing her, remember who you are. You are light. You are truth. And you were never meant to carry my pain." William wept like the boy who had once watched his mother's coffin roll down the mall. It wasn't about the jewels anymore. It wasn't even about the diary. It was about Diana's enduring presence, her refusal to be forgotten, her power to reach through time, and the way her legacy still lived inside her sons. For William, it meant everything. He later admitted to close friends that the letter was the single most healing moment of his life. "She saved the best part of her voice," he whispered once, "for the moment I needed it most." In a quiet ceremony, the returned jewelry was placed into the Princess Diana Memorial Vault, a newly established collection at Althorpe, her ancestral home. A small plaque was added, in memory of what could not be erased. It was William's tribute, not just to Diana, but to the truth. Camilla was never mentioned. She didn't need to be. History had already decided who belonged in which story. Now that these lost treasures are back where they belong, Princess Catherine isn't just honoring Diana's memory, she's protecting it. Quietly, without fanfare, she's reclaiming every piece, every story, and every truth. In doing so, she's drawing a line between what was taken and what will never be taken again. Diana's legacy lives on, not in silence, but in sapphire, gold, and the unwavering strength of the woman who found them.